It's time for a little bookish chit chat. I pulled some random books off my shelves and thought I would share them with you all. Hello, book friends. I'm Jen, and welcome to my reading life, and welcome to a random bookish chit chat. I have completely stolen this idea from Johanna over at Me, My Dog, and Books, and I think she got this idea from someone else. I'm not sure who that was, but basically the idea is to pull some random books off of your shelves and sit down and talk about them. And I know that I personally love to get a glimpse inside other people's bookshelves and what books they have on there. And I thought it would be fun to just share a few books with you. And yes, I thought you guys might enjoy this. And if you do, please let me know down in the comments. And I'd love to make this like a regular occurring video that I do, maybe every couple of months or so. So let me know if you enjoy this. And yes, but let us just get into the books that I picked. And I decided I was trying to think, how should I go about picking these books? So what I did was I went onto Goodreads, and I have two shelves that I've created on Goodreads. One is for my owned unread books, and one is for my owned read books. And I went into both of those. I looked to see how many books were in each of those shelves, and then I put those numbers into a random number generator, and I spun the random number generator 3 times. And so I pulled 3 unread books off of my shelf and then 3 read books off of my shelf. If you use Goodreads on a web browser, Goodreads will number all of the books that you have in a certain category. So you can, so a number is just randomly assigned, I think, just by when you added the book to that particular shelf. So this is completely random, and I have 6 books to share with you today. I think I will do the unread books first, and then I will share with you the 3 books off of my read shelves. And yeah, let's just have a little bookish chit chat. So grab a warm beverage. I forgot to make myself a cup of tea before I started this video, so I don't have a warm beverage right now, but I'm going to have one later this afternoon. And I've already had a few cups this morning, so probably set for tea for the moment. Anyway, I digress. Okay, so the first book that was randomly chosen off of my shelf is actually, this is kind of funny because 2 of the books that were picked are actually 2 books in one, which is kind of funny. So the first book that was picked was The Hours by Michael Cunningham. And this particular edition that I have, which sadly when it arrived, it was really banged up and it's kind of dirty, which I don't really love. But half of this book is The Hours by Michael Cunningham. And then if you flip it over, the other half is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. So this is actually 2 books in one, which is kind of fun. And I've not read either of them yet. I know we've talked a lot on here about Virginia Woolf, and I am going to read more Virginia Woolf. 2025 is going to be the year that I read at least one more Virginia Woolf book. So my understanding is that The Hours is, I believe, sort of draws from Mrs. Dalloway. I don't know what my edition says. Let's see. It says, passionate, profound, and deeply moving, The Hours is the story of 3 women. Clarissa Vaughn, who one New York morning goes about planning a party in honor of a beloved friend. Laura Brown, who in a 1950s Los Angeles suburb slowly begins to feel the constraints of a perfect family and home. And Virginia Woolf, recuperating with her husband in a London suburb and beginning to write Mrs. Dalloway. By the end of the novel, the stories have intertwined and finally come together in an act of subtle and haunting grace, demonstrating Michael Cunningham's deep empathy for his characters as well as the extraordinary resonance of his prose. So, yes. And this won the Pulitzer Prize. So, that's high praise for this one, isn't it? It says there's an introduction by him as well. Is that for the Mrs. Dalloway side or is that for his own side? I guess it's for his own side. Oh yeah, introduction by Michael Cunningham. I guess he's going to talk about The Hours and its connection to Mrs. Dalloway, which obviously is connected. Mrs. Dalloway is the story of one woman. Basically, it's a day in her life as she's preparing for a party. So it says, as she goes about her errands through London, the city still reeling from World War I and the 1918 flu pandemic, she is preoccupied with thoughts of the present and memories of the past of the people who have shaped her life. In Woolf's bold and groundbreaking interior style, the novel moves in and out of Clarissa's perspective and that of Septimus Smith, a shell-shocked survivor of the war. Woolf blends their lives and thoughts together in this transcendent novel, one that captures the rhythms of a lived day and the depths of human consciousness. Yes, so my plan really with this was, because this is, you know, lovingly bound into one edition, was to read Mrs. Dalloway and then read The Hours right after it. So I may have to make that a goal for when I do this. And I know The Hours is set in June, so maybe I'll plan to do this like May or June of next year. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So I will try to remember that. I have so many reading plans for 2025. You guys, I have to make a list because I'm going to forget something that I really want to read next year. And yes. So many books, so little time, right? So the next book off my unread shelf is one that I just randomly picked up at a secondhand bookshop because the author was familiar to me and it was a Penguin edition. And so I thought that it sounded interesting from the blurb on the back, and that is Berger's Daughter by Nadine Gordimer. And I believe Nadine Gordimer is South African, and so she writes a lot about, you know, sort of the racial issues of South Africa and different things. And in this one, it says that this is the story of a young woman's slowly evolving identity in the turbulent political environment of present-day South Africa. Her father's death in prison leaves Rosa Berger alone to explore the intricacies of what it actually means to be Berger's daughter. Berger or Berger? I'm not sure. Does anyone know? Moving through an overwhelming flood of sensuously described memories that will not release her, she arrives at last at a fresh understanding of her life. Nadine Gordimer's subtle, fastidiously crafted prose sweeps this engrossing narrative to a triumphant conclusion. Let's see, when was this written? It was first published in 1979. Okay, so it doesn't have the greatest star rating on Goodreads. It's got 3.5 stars. But I'll be curious to at least give it a try. I mean, I think I got it for like $1 or $2. So if I don't love it, I'll pass it along to a little free library. But I'd be curious if any of you, have you read this or have you read any Nadine Gordimer books? I feel like she's just one of those names that is kind of in my subconscious, but I'm not sure why. And when I look at the titles of the books that she's written, like nothing particularly stands out to me, but I just feel like I know her name. So we'll see. And then my final book from my unread shelf that has been randomly selected to talk about today is Murder of a Lady by Anthony Wynne. And this is part of the British Library Crime Classics series. And I'm trying to remember where I got this. I don't know. I don't know where I got it, but I've had it for a few years. Looks like I purchased this in October of 2021. Oh, it was, I got this for my birthday. So I believe this was on my wish list because I love the British Library Crime Classics series, and I keep wanting to read more of it. And this one is set in the Scottish Highlands at Duckland Castle. It says, late one night, the body of Mary Gregor, sister of the Laird of Duckland, is found in the castle. She has been stabbed to death in her bedroom, but the room is locked from within and the windows are barred. The only tiny clue to the culprit is a silver fish's scale left on the floor next to Mary's body. And then I believe that this is part of a series with this Inspector Dundas. And I think this is the 12th book in the series. Oh, this is a Dr. Haley series. Dr. Eustace Haley, a snuff-taking physician and psychologist in England and sometimes Scotland. That's what it says on Goodreads about this series. I I don't know. It doesn't mention, oh, here's Eustace. Oh, okay. Oh, let's see. So Inspector Dundas is called in, and then it says, but luckily for Inspector Dundas, the gifted amateur sleuth, Eustace Haley, is on the scene and unravels a more logical solution to this most fiendish of plots. Well, I do love a locked room mystery, and yes, this sounds lovely. So this was first published in 1931. Has anyone read this one? And can you tell me anything good about it? It doesn't have the highest rating on Goodreads. I think it's got like a 3.4, but you know, sometimes Goodreads ratings and my own personal opinions do not always match up. So sometimes it's a good guideline. And especially if I've started a book or I'm thinking about reading a book that I'm not 100% sure of, sometimes I'll look at the reviews and, kind of go through a few reviews, like a few 5-star reviews, a few 3 stars, a few 1 stars, and kind of try to get an idea of what it is that people liked and didn't like about the book. So sometimes that's helpful, but sometimes it's not. And sometimes there's just not that many reviews, and so there's not enough opinion to help me decide if the book is going to be one for me or not. I don't even know why I digressed into that, but I did. Okay, so those are the 3 unread books off of my shelf that I'm sharing with you all today. So yes. And now we will switch and talk about the 3 books from my shelf that I have read. And I'm curious. I think I'm going to pull up my own reviews. We'll see if I actually wrote reviews of these because I am inconsistent in my Goodreads reviews. But let's see if I wrote anything about any of these. The first book off of my red shelf that came up from the random number generator was No Name by Wilkie Collins. And I finished this, I read this in April of 2022. And I actually read this with a group on Instagram that I think was kind of reading through some Wilkie Collins books, and I joined in for No Name. This was my very first Wilkie Collins, and I really, really enjoyed it. This cover, it kind of makes it seem a little bit spooky, but I don't really remember there being anything spooky about No Name. So it says, let's see. So after the tragic deaths of their parents, Magdalene and Nora discover the devastating news that they are both illegitimate and not entitled to any inheritance. Nora is forced to become a governess to earn her keep, but Magdalene has grander plans and embarks on an elaborate scheme of revenge against her cold-hearted relatives. So the one thing that I remember from reading this was that it felt very Dickensian to me. And not that I've read a ton of Dickens, but from what I have and what I know about Charles Dickens, just his characterization, and, there are quite a number of characters in this book, and just, we get very kind of down into the minutia of life amongst all of the characters. And yes, you could definitely see, I know Collins and Dickens were friends, and I'm sure there was some influence happening there. So I felt like I saw some of that. And it's kind of funny because it looks like I annotated the first third of this book, and then I don't know if I just got tired or what happened, but these things happen sometimes. I did read the entire book. I did really like this. I was glad that this was my first Wilkie Collins because it was just such an interesting story. I really liked the sisters in this one. Actually, that's kind of funny because I just realized that my second Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White, which I just read, also features sisters. And yeah, so there's a lot of sisterly relationships. And I can definitely see there are some similarities between the 2 sisters in both of these novels, No Name and The Woman in White. So we have one sort of strong-willed sister, and we have another one who's kind of going along with the status quo, what society wants her to do. And that's kind of interesting. I hadn't really thought of that until just now. But if you have read some of Wilkie Collins' other books, nothing about this really feels kind of ghostly or spooky to me, which I feel like this cover is maybe a little bit misleading. At least that's not what stands out to me from my remembrance of this book. Did I write a review of it in Goodreads? No, I did not, because I'm inconsistent at best at these things. But I do remember really enjoying this. And I just remember, um, actually, I don't want to tell you what I remember because it's a spoiler. So, but if you're interested in reading a Wilkie Collins and you've already read like The Woman in White and Moonstone, and some of his really popular ones, I definitely would recommend giving No Name a try because it's definitely worth a read. Then my second randomly picked book off of my red shelf was In This House of Breed by Rumer Godden. This is a story about a convent and about some women in the convent, in particular Philippa Talbot. And she's a woman who she's been working, I believe in, does it say, yeah, civil service. And I think she's in her like, I don't know, 40s, 50s, and she decides to become a nun, and she enters this convent of Benedictine nuns, and it's all about sort of the lives and relationships of the nuns and what happens to them. And there are some novice nuns. There are, certainly nuns that have, it's been their vocation their whole life. And so you just kind of see the inner workings of this convent. And I found this just utterly fascinating. I don't know what it is about nuns and convents, but I think I may have mentioned before, I did go through a phase where I read a number of books that featured nuns or convents in them. This was one of them. I read The Matrix by Lauren Groff, and I read Agnes of Little Neon, something like that. I forget what it was called. I'll put the title here on the screen. I didn't love that one as much as the other two, but I really, really enjoyed this one, and I love The Matrix. It's not a book for everybody. I will just say that right off the bat, but if it's something that sounds good to you, give it a try. It's amazingly written. But this is also really good. Let me look up my rating and if I actually wrote a review of this. So I gave this book 4 stars on Goodreads, and I read this in February of 2023. I will read you my review. It says, I have read a number of books in recent years that feature nuns and convent life, and this one is definitely a standout. It took a bit for me to settle into this book, but I wonder if maybe that's purposeful. I can imagine, even if you have a calling, that settling into convent life would be a serious adjustment. I kept flipping back to the list at the beginning of my book to all of the nuns' names and their jobs because it was definitely a challenge to keep everyone straight at first. Once I settled into the story, I found its quiet, slow pace very peaceful. While it took me longer than average to read this one, it was mostly because I didn't want to rush over Godden's imagery and all the intricacies of monastic life, which I found fascinating. This reminded me of my favorite kind of epic story, which spans decades and covers so many characters' lives. I was also impressed by how Godden switches the timeline around almost mid-sentence sometimes, but in a way that allows you to follow the plot and reorient yourself seamlessly, a skill that few authors are very successful at. I became fully invested in Philippa and all of the other nuns, and seeing their lives, their dramas, their pettiness, their selflessness, their love of their work they did was a joy. I've only ever read one of Godden's children's books, The Story of Holly and Ivy, which I adore, but In This House of Breed has made me an even bigger fan of hers. Yes, 100%. I stand by my original review. If you're interested in books about nuns or convents, then I highly, highly recommend this one. I again, like my review said, I think this is sort of a quiet, slower paced read. I mean, it definitely feels like an epic novel because there are so many characters. Let me just show you the character list at the beginning. Where is it? So there's a floor plan of the convent. I did use that as well. I flipped back and forth to it. Where's oh, maybe it's here. Oh, here we go. Yes. So there's the list of characters. And it goes on to a second page. So lots and lots and lots of characters. And they're all sister somebody or other. So keeping track of them was a little bit challenging at first, but you really do get to know them. And, they're all so unique and have such interesting personality traits that I think it, once you become, settled into the story, then it's much easier to keep them straight. So, but if you haven't read this, I highly recommend it. And, it's so funny because I feel like Rumor Godden's probably best known for the Green Gage Summer, which I read this summer finally, and I didn't love. So I would highly recommend this one over that book. So if that's means anything at all. And then the third book that was randomly selected off my red shelf was, again, 2 books in one, which is The Pursuit of Love and Love in a Cold Climate by Nancy Mitford. And let's see, when did I read this? I read this back in... Well, I think I read The Pursuit of Love at the end of 2022, and then I read Love in a Cold Climate in early 2023, and I thoroughly loved these books. I was completely drawn into Nancy Mitford's writing. She's very witty, very acerbic. Her characters are just so fascinating. Even if they're unlikable, they are still fascinating. So we are following Linda Radlett in The Pursuit of Love, and the story is being told by her cousin Fanny. So we're seeing everything through Fanny's perspective. And then Love in a Cold Climate revolves around Polly Hampton. I don't remember as much about Love in a Cold Climate. I thought it was still told from Fanny's point of view. Yes. So both books are told from Fanny's point of view. So we're just seeing kind of 2 of the women in her life. And, Fanny's just an excellent observer of human nature and these 2 very unique women. So I definitely enjoyed Linda's story, I think a little bit more, but overall I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely love The Pursuit of Love, and I have gone on to read the 3rd book in this series, which is Don't Tell Alfred, I believe, which is Fanny and her husband. He becomes like the ambassador to France, I believe. So they moved to Paris, and it's just kind of all about what happens to them there. And it's not nearly as good as these 2. I found it slow going. There's some like political stuff that's being talked about, like between France and England and what's going on at that time. And so it was a little bit like things I didn't have a lot of reference to as an American. So that kind of didn't interest me that much, but there were some funny things about that book, but these 2 are absolutely wonderful. Oh, and also, if you have read or you're going to read The Pursuit of Love, then I highly recommend you read Darling by India Knight, which is a modern retelling of The Pursuit of Love, and just so funny. So hilarious. And the character of Uncle Matthew in Darling, the way he is portrayed, he's like an aging 80s rock star, and it's just every time I think about it, and I think I've talked about it before on my channel, but it's so funny and just so good. So highly recommend this. Highly recommend Darling as well. So we got a bonus book in this one. So yeah, so those are a few of the random books off of my shelf. Just, have a little chat about them and share them with you. And let me know, have you read any of the 3 unread books that I talked about? Have you read any of the 3 books that I have read? Did you enjoy them as well? Because amazingly, actually, it's funny because I was about to say it was amazing that I picked 3 books that I really enjoyed, but I don't really keep books on my red shelves if I didn't enjoy them. So unless I do have a couple of books that I've kept just because the book itself is so beautiful to look at, even though it wasn't that I hated the story, it just wasn't a book that like I'm going to be drawn to reading again per se, but I do have a couple of books that I've kept just because they're pretty. Does anyone else do that? So yes, so I hope you enjoyed this little random bookish chit chat about some of the titles on my shelves. And if you enjoyed this, let me know in the comments down below, and I'd be happy to randomly pull some more books and talk about them again in the future. And if you did enjoy this video, I'd love it if you could give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you aren't already subscribed. And thank you so much for watching, and I will be back with another video very soon. Bye.